Sarishaman. I'm the founder of the Sustainable Alpine Tourism Initiative, which was set up as a result of my Cambridge University research into starting to look at circular economy and then kind of branching out into tourism for my dissertation and my thesis. And the interesting thing was Cambridge said you have to do a personal leadership challenge, and I crazily decided to put on a conference, which was due to take place in March in Austria, but given all plans this year, I think definitely disrupted by coronavirus, and decided to set this up as a digital conference series. So thank you so much for everyone that's joined today. Delighted to be joined by our panelists because we'll be going through why sustainability and connecting with nature in particular is really important in the Alpine hotel industry, and why that can actually support a different kind of guest experience and evolve where we really are in terms of this COVID impacted world. There were, in all honesty, I think the industry has obviously been faced real kind of issues in terms of the coronavirus crisis, and I'm very sensitive to that, and also very conscious that equally in these times of crisis, I think we definitely have to have solidarity in understanding the responses and the approaches that we can take to not only support some of those stakeholders in understanding the current situation, but also supporting some dialogues and roadmaps about what could actually be a different vision for tourism in this post-COVID world as well. And so the experts that we've got here today are really at the forefront of that across a multitude of industries and geographies. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists and then go to kind of each of them to ask specific questions on their areas of focus. And I have to say that over the last 2 years, these experts have really been at the forefront of the conversations around these topics, from circular economy in the tourism industry to roadmaps around certification, to looking at reducing plastic, to understanding how to connect to guest experience and more. So I think we're really lucky to kind of have this conversation today, and I'm really delighted that you could all be here to join in on that. So I'm going to introduce our panel. So we've got Fabrice Sorin, who's the founding partner of the CE360 Alliance, and he's actually also a co-author of a fantastic report which we'll be talking about a little bit later on circular economy in the tourism industry. We have Regina Preslmaier, who is actually a senior representative of the Austrian Eco Label, who are really at the forefront of some of those discussions around roadmaps, specifically in the tourism space as well in Austria, and understanding why measurement and metrics are really critical to move sustainability forward in the hotel sector. You have Joe Hendrickx, who is the founder of Travel Without Plastic, and Joe is fantastic at understanding a myriad of things, from communication with guests and why that's critical to supply chains and reduction of single-use plastic. And she's going to be demystifying the post-COVID context a little bit, or should I say COVID-impacted context, because we're all living through that still. And we've got Matthias Leitner, who is a fantastic hotelier. I think Matthias is really at the forefront of understanding where sustainability is in terms of the hotel that he operates in, but also is pioneering as an entrepreneur as well, and connects a lot of hotels in the region of Kaprun, where he's based in Austria. We'll be joined by our fantastic facilitators today as well for the breakout sessions. So after the panel, we'll go to a Q&A and then to a breakout. So we've got Simona Azzolini, who is a very good friend of mine from Cambridge, from the course. She's also a fantastic consultant on sustainability and across a multitude of different industries, from consumer goods to fashion, to broader, and really is at the forefront of understanding circular economy in the fashion industry as well. So those of you that are interested in that, please do reach out to Simona as well. And Kelly Coombes, who is a fantastic expert around climate risk and climate strategy, has background in the insurance industry, but is now really supporting a lot of corporates to transition their business model, and has been a great source of energy throughout this project as well. So I'm going to kickstart with Fabrice. So Fabrice, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here. So you produced a fantastic report, and I think the other thing I would say is that your career spans an extensive range of research on this topic of circular economy, and specifically in the hospitality industry, where your research is. Can you explain a bit about how we can apply circular economy approaches to tourism, and specifically delving into the report that you recently wrote on that? Because I think having done research in this space, I would say that piece that you wrote is really groundbreaking in understanding the ecosystem and how actually for hotels, circular economy is a real value creator and a potential lens that could be quite important at this current moment in time.
Sure. Yeah. First, let's, if you allow me, let's put some context and let's make a statement as to how we describe a circular economy. So there's lots of definition of what is a circular economy, and it's a constantly evolving concept. The definition we use is that the circular economy, it's an economic model that's regenerative by intent of natural and social capital, and that operates within the Earth ecosystem boundaries. So from that point, we insist on the system thinking aspect of it. Okay. Now, for the participants that are not following these discussions that closely, the circular economy is now, you can assume, mainstream, especially in Europe. It is the central part of the new EU Green New Deal and of the COVID recovery package. The circular economy rationale has been pushed, and is currently getting mainstream via the goods producing industries. So anything from fast-moving consumer goods to fashion, textile, construction, and lately the finance industry that is fastly moving towards circular economy. So one thing that was lacking in this paradigm change, if you want, as to how we see economic model are service industries. And tourism is the service industries. It's one of the largest industry globally, and it interacts and interlinks with literally every single other industries, from transports to finance, tech, agriculture, you name it. So as such, because of the interlinkages of the industry, we, along with my colleague Stephanie Nelson, we decided to look at the circular economy framework and see how, if and how could it apply to tourism. So we, on our paper, because the tourism industry has so many actors operating so many different business models, we split the type of tourism actors in two categories: the asset heavy and the asset light. So asset heavy, you can assume that's hotel, transport operator, because of the degree of physical assets that they actually operate within their business models. Then you have the asset light model, which represents the online travel agencies, the tour operators, the distribution. So those are the two key categories. And the question we ask on the report is, how would the circular economy principle and framework apply to those two types of actors? So if we bring it back to the hotels, hotels fall into the asset heavy categories. And here, what we suggest and posit on our publication is that there is a rational and a competitive advantage for hotels as part of the tourism ecosystem, which is possibly the most obvious because of the high ratio and intensity of material flows that they use in their build operation phase. Hotels generate a substantial material waste streams, plastics, food waste, furniture, etc. And they also use a large amount of utilities for electricity, heating. So a circular economy approach applied to hotels can create very quick return on investment through the reduction of operation expenses. And the lever for this is the procurement. The change in the thinking of procurement from buying the goods to buying the services as goods, for example. So what we call product service system. So the circular economy inspired change in the procurement method can transform waste streams into income streams. And that's one of the suggestions we put forward in the report. So that's for the hotel operation phase. And if you extend that to the hotel construction phase, they are also very important, but much more capital intensive circular economy transformation that can be applied. And that is in the design and build of the hotel. So if you apply the circular economy principle to hotel builds, you start to design hotel for modularity, for reuse, for rebuild, for relocation. And this approach, it drastically reduces the primary material use and therefore the GHG emission, the extraction, transformation, and transportation phases. Additionally, if you take the view from the hotel developers and the real estate asset owners, the economics are quite positive in the long run, because if you have a real estate asset that you can deconstruct and rebuild, you're basically building something at the cost, at the material cost of yesterday. So the economics are quite positive here. So that's how we've applied this economy principle to the hotel especially. And what we suggest is that there is a positive arbitrage for hotel operators and hotel asset owners.
And I think what's fascinating what you say is that holistic nature of what hotels can actually do. I think even in my own research, I found that discussion around buildings and particularly materials was quite an interesting one with hotels that I spoke to, because some of them that were really at the forefront of this were saying things like they were using wood from a retrofit to actually use in part of their heating process. They were looking at how to turn grey water into reuse for other things within the hotel. And so it was really about that resource efficiency argument, which also is then cost efficiency as well. I think in all of the things you've said, what's quite interesting, and it links to Regina actually perfectly, is the fact that in order to tackle many of these things, it's a very holistic view that you have to have of a hotel and of the industry as well. And I think that's where certifications are actually very helpful in terms of potentially being quite a useful roadmap. So I just want to bring Regina in to ask about what the role the eco-labels and certifications more generally play in supporting sustainability roadmaps in hotels. So especially when it comes to this kind of knowledge sharing, I think many of the levers that Fabrice mentioned and also the ones in my own research have shown that there's potentially a really big knowledge gap around sustainability in certain hotel sectors, and in Alpine tourism in particular. I think there's a real thirst for knowledge, and people are quite open to learning about these topics and these roadmaps. Would you agree? And could you explain a bit about why roadmaps are so important in terms of understanding that from your perspective?
Thank you, Sarisha, and thank you for the kind introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be here with you. Yeah, if we are talking about sustainable tourism, we really can't help, and we have to talk about eco-labeling too. That's really where you can see at forefront as a guest or even as a hotel that somebody is really acting green in a global, in a general approach from the hotel. Yeah, in Austria, well, tourism is a very important sector of our industry, of the global economy in Austria, and so we really had to do very early to take some decisions and to find more sustainable ways for our tourism industry. So we were the first to develop a national eco-label for tourism enterprises already in 1996. And in the following years, we helped to develop the EU eco-label for tourist accommodations too. And we're still following that and working close together with them, because I think there are different labels for different countries and at different national and international labels that should really cooperate more intensively. That's what we think. But you were talking about a roadmap, and that's also a kind of a picture how we like to see our eco-label also. So our aim is a little bit to work out all the important aspects in a tourism enterprise and to offer alternative and possibly more sustainable options to the management. So the criteria are not, the result of our endless wisdom in the ministry. Thank God. They are really the result of a thorough stakeholder process. So we try to involve representatives from the tourism industry, as well as sustainability, environmental experts, but also stakeholders from the politics and from society. So to have a real good foundation for the criteria, because we just don't want to have only criteria which are perfectly green and nobody in the end would be able to implement them. So that wouldn't lead us to any good solution. So we try to be also highly practical, and this practical orientation is for us in the eco-labeling system practically more important than this high political aims that a hotel or restaurant could never achieve. So we can't go to a hotel and tell them, we have such good aims at the government, and we have the good report from Fabrice, and you should now implement circular economy in your hotel. Yeah, that's not the approach that we take. We just like to talk about practical issues. And also our approach is a little bit, you have in your daily work, you have so many decisions to take, and it's always our approach to find out, are there any more sustainable ways of doing our daily business? So that's the approach that we are talking about. But of course, on the other hand, it's not only a roadmap, but we are also talking about official certification. So that's really, to put a stamp on it, to bring some more seriosity into the whole thing, and something that could help you really for communications. Everybody's talking about greenwashing, and you really need, more this kind of trust element that the certification can bring to you. Where we see it's really extremely important is especially the sector of procurement, and especially public procurement. I'm also working in the Ministry of Climate Protection, and so we have been working for many years now to make our public procurement in the ministries and in the governmental organizations more sustainable, and it's still a long way to go, but we've had some successes too, and there is still a lot that we try to develop during the next month and years. Yeah.
I think it's fantastically what you say about the practicality, because I think that's so essential. And I think in many of the discussions I've had with hoteliers, that's really something that comes out, is that hotels want practical solutions, and they really want on the ground examples of what works and what's required. And I think this brings me really nicely to Joe, actually, in terms of this current COVID-19 context, because Joe set up an organisation that really tries to reduce plastic use in the hospitality and hotel and tourism industry. And I think what's really interesting is that in this current pandemic, there's been a sort of potential default to plastic strategy, or default to something that may be considered less sustainable, or more a perception that that's what's required. And I think some of the work that you've done, Joe, is fantastic at demystifying that and explaining why, in fact, now more than ever, it's critical that we do bring sustainability into that both procurement process, but also the broader demystifying the health and safety side of it too, because often those solutions don't have to default to something which is not sustainable. So Joe, I wondered if you could explain a bit about your work in that space at this current moment in time, and what you're really hearing on the ground. And just so you know, Joe's actually dialing in from the Canary Islands, so I think she's got quite an interesting context of this with some of the hotels in the Mediterranean as well. But I think given that at the current point in time, a lot of hoteliers around Europe are facing similar challenges with COVID-19. I think it'd be great to hear your perspective on this, because I think quite a few people on the call might find that really interesting.
Great, thanks, Sarisha. Yeah, we've had experience of working with hotels to help them reduce plastic back in 2011, actually, even though Travel Without Plastic wasn't formally founded until 2017, and that's when it became the kind of sole focus of our work. And prior to working in sustainability, I was actually a health and safety, working with hotels to ensure they met health, safety and hygiene standards anyway. So from the start, our recommendations around plastic reduction have always taken health and safety into account. And we know that hotel managers and their teams have got a lot of priorities to juggle. So we want to make it as easy as possible for them to plan and implement practical and affordable changes that will reduce waste without impacting on the guest experience or health and safety standards. And there's been and for our insight now into how to do this, because it seemed like so many businesses were really making good progress, and then suddenly, like you've said, single use became the answer to hygiene, but often it's not, and there's a lack of logic behind that assumption. And you know, many of you that are listening might have seen the statement from around 120 or so scientists earlier in the year that says, you know, single-use plastic doesn't necessarily equate to hygiene. So it's not just a travel without plastic observation. And over the course of time, we've really become firm believers in prioritizing processes rather than relying on products. So some specific examples of that: the sudden appearance of these door stickers, you know, that being sanitized. And actually, if you think about it logically, all these stickers really tell you is that nobody has been in the room since the sticker went onto the door. It's actually the process of the cleaning and thorough cleaning that guarantees the hygiene of the room. And I've, in the Canary Islands, been into hotel rooms with these stickers on the door, and I found items inside that haven't even been cleaned properly, let alone sanitized. So it's just better to have the process than revert it to the products. It's a similar thing with gloves. You know, most people spread more germs when they're wearing gloves because in their hands are clean, which of course they are, but the gloves aren't. And again, it'd be better to processes around frequent hand washing than relying on a false sense of security given by a lot of the single-use plastic products. But there was just so much to do on this subject that the only way for us to kind of get everything that we knew and we'd learned out to as wide an audience as possible was to put it into an e-learning that we've been able to make available free of charge on reducing single-use plastic, meeting hygiene standards, but also how to engage staff, how to engage guests, and how to engage suppliers further down the line with that approach, so that they're providing process solutions, leading on to what everyone said really about procurement. At our sister site, greenerguest.com, and we're going to be updating that site over the weekend, but from next week, for anybody that's interested in that topic or to take the learning course, then we'd highly recommend them to do so, as it's free of charge. We've got really great feedback from that. And we, you know, people are finding it really helpful. We'd love as many people as possible to access that, so we can get what's in our heads out into practice for people to be able to use, as you said, a little bit equation with Jean.
I think that's fantastic, and I think in what you say, there's so much transversal thinking that's required in terms of that approach with the guests, the supply chain, and also the staff as well, which is critical. I think so often people forget that staff are such a huge part of the hotel. And really interestingly, a lot of the hotels in the Alpine context are family owned, and therefore there is a real engagement with staff already taking place. But I think for that to evolve in terms of sustainability leadership, it requires a big training process with staff and an onboarding of ideas that staff might have, because they're very close to some of those topics on the ground. I know in the discussions that we've had before, Joe, you've mentioned that often the technical teams are the ones that have a lot of those expertise, and yet there's not much interaction necessarily in terms of sustainability between the tech teams and the marketing teams. But actually those types of cross-role knowledge sharing is quite critical. I'm just going to bring Matthias in actually on this point specifically around tourists, because I think you're obviously based in Zellamzee and in the beautiful valleys of Kaprun. And I wondered, do you think, being a second generation hotelier yourself, and I know your family are obviously very engaged in this as well, you've got an amazing parents who set up the hotel at the forefront of that thinking. So do you think that the younger generation of hoteliers, specifically where you're based, and also tourists in the same regard, care about sustainability and consider it? I think in my own research, I'd posed that question as part of my research was, do intergenerational factors impact sustainability perceptions of hoteliers? And I think from my side, the answer to that would be yes. But I wondered, do you see the same thing? And could you elaborate a little bit on your perspective on that intergenerational factor of younger hoteliers and tourists potentially caring more about this topic?
Yes, so I have the same opinion. I think the younger generation more cares about that on the hotelier side as well as on the guest side, and there's probably several reasons for that. First of all, sustainability is way more present from early age on, also because of social networks, because all of the climate change things and it's way more present and direct to you. Then also here, what I can tell you as a hotelier perspective, and what I see with other young people here, we are proud where we live, we are proud where we come from, and we are also proud that we use local suppliers. So it's also something, it has probably something to do with nationality, but it's in other countries the same. Also, having local suppliers is a point of quality for you, especially when it comes to food. Same thing, you don't have long supply chains anymore. You have better quality products, you know where you get it from, and it's also good for your point of sales. So guests definitely highly rate when you can tell them exactly where your meat comes from, where your vegetables come from, how you use it. All of this together is part of our business model and also part of the point of sale. And you can especially see not only younger generations, so throughout the generations, it's getting more and more valuable how hoteliers work in the background, so the organization of everything, and how you also take care about nature. And yeah, Sarisha asked me to give you an example as well. I tell you a short example. We have an example package here in our hotel in summer, which is called holiday gardening. So guests don't pay for their breakfast. They work 2 hours in the morning in the garden, help plant food, and all the stuff the cooks use later on. So they're getting part of the process, and you involve guests in that process. And I think that's a really important point to show it this direct, and the guests value it even more afterwards because they exactly know where it comes from. And this goes on and on with a lot of things. So we, for example, we have the possibility, especially for bigger groups, that the rooms just get cleaned every second day. Therefore they get, for example, a drink or something special. So we reduce we give a little bit of how you say it, pause for the staff as well. So you can implement a lot of things here. And I'm definitely feeling.
And I can see that some of the audience love the idea of the gardening break, because I think what you're doing in that is you're connecting nature to the guest experience. And I think that was one thing that came across really strongly in my research recommendations, was that hoteliers from all generations thought that there was a very big role for storytelling, in the sense of not just marketing, but actually using this as a value creator to have a differentiated experience that you can offer your guests. And I think that's a really important part of understanding where we go forward in a post-COVID context as well, or even in a COVID impacted context, because I think people are getting a lot closer to understanding why nature is important. And if that's then reflected in a leisure choice, and hotels can offer that, I think that's a really strong kind of position. I think that brings me really nicely onto Fabrice, actually, because I think Fabrice, in your research, I read quite a strong thread about why, and I guess Matthias alluded to this a moment ago, about how sustainability can be a real value creator, both in terms of operationally for the business, but also in terms of the storytelling that's required. And one thing about circular economy is that it's really critical to connect both the producer side and the consumer side. I was wondering, in terms of this COVID-19 context right now, how do you think circular economy can be value created for hotels, both in the medium to long term? And where do you think are the key levers in that? Do you think it is that we need more storytelling, or is there something else that's a kind of missing link to scale up that connection and circularity?
I think, well, first, in regards to the impact of COVID-19, as to would it impact negatively the circular economy arbitrage and rationale for tourism and hotel operators, my opinion is that circular economy in the waste stream now, and it is just a superior, more effective economic model at all levels, from the macro, meso to the micro level, firm level. So it is there to stay. It will become the norm. In regards to the value creation for hotel, I think there's three. If you look at the mid to long term angle, there's three ways that actually complement each other, where the circular economy approach and framework can provide value. As mentioned before, there are opportunities for OPEX reduction by implementing circular procurement in the hotel operation, in close cooperation with the supply chain, and more specifically with the local supply chain partners. Secondly, there's a higher long-term return on investments and return on capital employed by deploying circular modular build approach in the design and build and renovation phases of hotel assets. And the third part, to link up to what Matthias was mentioning, is there's a strong value creation potential in answering the changes in demand and buying triggers from the consumers, and that is through a purpose-driven value proposition. So creating value for the hotel will not really be just about a hotel room and a good breakfast and a clean room, although those are key service level to deliver, but it will be more and more about increasing the scope and the variety of services delivered to a wider base of stakeholders. So not only visitors, but as importantly, local populations, stakeholders, shareholders, employees, local authorities. To that extent, you could imagine the hotel evolving into an enabler of a circular economy transformation for a city, a destination, right? So hotel increasing the scope, you can imagine subscription model getting more interest and scaling up. There's a good example of some chains such as Citizen M, for example, moving towards subscription model, whereby they extend the scope of the services provided, not only to basic hotel services, but also to experiences that are not de facto hospitality related, if you want. And what Matthias' example showed on the holiday gardening is also potentially a lever to have an activity that is not only about delivering rooms and many rooms and maybe meeting space, but also delivering social capital regenerations by anchoring the hotel into the social and economic fabric of a destination. So I think that's something when you take the circular economy, social capital regeneration objective, that's where hotel purpose-driven business proposition can be quite effective in our view.
I think I love that. I love the fact that you can basically turn something which might be considered value in terms of a bilateral value exchange to something which is far broader in terms of the community impact that can have. I think we're seeing similar models potentially coming on the energy side as well. I know a couple of discussions that I've had with people have been around community solar and community energy, because I think if you look at the energy space, that's another area where there's potential to try and collaborate with other hotels and have a kind of pooled cost saving as a result of sharing that underlying asset. I think looking at that from the asset perspective of what are the assets of that hotel and what are the costs that they incur in terms of energy or anything that might be able to be shared, both in terms of sharing on the cost side, but also sharing on the value side, like extending experiences out, is really, really interesting. And I think we'll be touching upon that point of collaboration a little bit later with Matthias as well, because I think one of the initiatives that he's implemented is actually very similar in that sense of a kind of consortium of hotels in a region that are trying to address some of those issues, which is great. So I'm going to go over to Regina and some of the ideas about tangible metrics. So in what Fabrice mentioned, there's clearly a really strong role for metrics and management, because then you can actually understand and to some extent, I guess, quantify that value that's being created, whether it's CO2 reduction, whether it's proportion of plastic waste reduced. For example, I know there's a couple of in fact, there's a fantastic organisation called One Tree at a Time, and I'll share it on the SATI account for those of you that didn't hear. But their founder was helping chalets to reduce plastic waste and general household waste from measuring it. And I think that measurement piece is so critical. So could you explain a bit about what you think the importance of measurement and tangible metrics are in this discussion that we're having today as well?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I don't want to make everybody shy away if you're talking about metrics too much, but really to get started in a hotel, I would really not deviate, too much from the classical metrics of resource use in the beginning. Yeah? That's how most of our businesses achieve the biggest cost reductions and savings. And so the chance of seeing results and getting kind of a tailwind soon are the highest with this beginner strategy. And from recording meaningful data on energy, on water use, and waste produced, you do get really important evidence where you could get started. Just by collecting data, you don't have achieved anything really, but you know where you can get started. So we really want everybody to get active and to implement something. And other softer factors are often really very more complicated to measure, and it's hard to define meaningful metrics, either generally or especially for the individual situation. So things like the percentage of, staff with more than 5 or 10 years in the hotel, or guests that have become regulars, or sustainable procurement that have been mentioned before, or like the integration in a regional economy. I like that, what Fabrice said before, with suppliers and customers. They don't result necessarily in direct income rises, but I think they are very important, and what they might bring is a kind of higher stability and even more resilience in situations of crisis like the one we're having right now. Those considerations of metrics and possible sustainable impacts. So we try to include them, of course, in the definition of our sustainable criteria for the eco-label, so that the hotel managers and the facility managers that are dealing with those topics, they won't have to start scientific research beforehand. What we see as important is that we want to highlight where you can actually get started and to show which metrics really make a difference in your own property. We are not scientists, really, and most of the hoteliers, we don't want them to become scientists either. We have enough scientists, thank you, Fabrice, for that. But we don't want the hoteliers to do that job. So they are supposed to be responsible hosts, and we want to put more the practical aspect in the foreground. So what we try to achieve is to make the right decisions as easy as possible. So we have been developing over the last years software tools and databases with information for the hotels to tell them those are the topics that you have to deal with, and those are the practical tips how you can implement them. So our perspective to metrics is more to do the scientific work on the metrics beforehand and to translate that into practical tips for daily routine and even for strategic decision making in a hotel. And coming back maybe to your picture of the roadmap, we definitely encourage hotels to use this knowledge databases that have been collected. Please copy, please steal as much as possible and start getting active.
I think that's a great message in terms of that kind of learning as well, because I think it's so critical that we have that kind of cross organization sharing in terms of what works, what's important, and the different roadmaps. Because I think I want to bring Joe in on this actually, because I think Joe's got a really interesting perspective on the importance of communication. I know, Joe, that when we've spoken in the past, that really felt like such a strong thread of your work and your engagement, both within a hotel, but also with connecting sustainability with the guests who are in that hotel. So what role do you think communication has to play in terms of this connection with the guest experience, both in terms of the hotels that you've worked with, but also just more broadly in the industry as well?
Yeah, I do always find myself coming back to communication being the answer and playing a key role for when we've talked in the past. And I think whilst from the experience I've had isn't with Alpine hotels, I'll be clear about that from the start. It's very much with the more package holidays to the kind of Mediterranean, the Canary Islands, where I'm based here. And there is improvement in this area, but I do still feel that a lot of hotels are missing out on a great opportunity, either because they don't communicate the work they're doing, or if they do, it's hidden away in a sustainability report, or it's just done in a very non-engaging way. It's not bringing it to life for the guest. You know, and Matthias is the total opposite to that with the story that he's just told us, which is fantastic. But I found myself over the last 12 or 13 years of working in sustainability, especially when I've been auditing for certification standards, I find out masses of amazing information. Like the hotel in Turkey, their entire huge bread selection for the buffet came from a baking family just down the road, and for over 10 years. And there was a hotel here that had art on the wall for sale that supported all local artists. There's a hotel in the Gambia, it collected all the food cans they used in the kitchens. They gave them to a local family. They got melted down into pots that the hotel then bought back to use in their own kitchens. And not one guest in any of these hotels knew about any of these things. Not one. Amazing stories, local impact, nobody knew about it. They knew they had towel reuse programs, they knew the lights were on timers in the corridors because they saw them. They knew there were dual flush systems in the toilets, but it just doesn't excite them. It would take me an hour or two to elicit these stories during an audit, and then help people to think about, bring this to life. You know, when you tell this stuff, they love it. So I think for me, it's about how you tell that story. And as you said, there are people in the hotel, that there are amazing teams in the back of house of the hotel that never have that opportunity, either because they don't see the customers, perhaps they don't speak the language of the customers, to get that story told. So I do think it's about storytelling, and people have highlighted that before, but I think it's about finding your identity as well. And it seems that Matthias's hotel has done that very well. And then thinking about, how do you get that identity across to people? So before, you know, during, even after their stay, what platforms do you use to do that? Do hotel staff lead by example and bring sustainability to life, so that it's not just the written communications, but it's the actions that showcase you know, what people do? And I think if people don't know where to start with that, you know, you can just get your teams together, for instance, and hold a bit of a brainstorming workshop and ask these questions, but make sure it's done authentically by really meaning it, and, you know, ticking the box on communications. And I think it does make business sense, as people have mentioned. It's maybe not easy to quantify, but, you know, if you stay in a place that meets or exceed your views, you're likely to shout about that yourselves on your own social media, to your own friends and family. Word of mouth marketing, it's a great way to get your brand in front of people. So you need to kind of find your why, find your identity, and connect it, and then tell it in an engaging way that resonates with your customer demographic.
I think that's fantastic in what you said. I think the finding the why and then saying, well, that's a value for your guests and a differentiator is so critical. I think in what you were saying about the visibility of this within Alpine hotels. So I did part of my research was on a content analysis to look at hotel websites in a region of the Alps where I doing a lot of work in Salzburgerland, and I found that actually there was a really low level of communication of sustainability on a hotel's website, for example, which might be a primary booking channel. I think Matthias was definitely an exception to this, because I think he's definitely the forefront of that, both on social media and on web. But I think there's a real opportunity in connecting that story through those channels of communication. And so, yeah, I think that's a space to watch and to do it tangibly as well. I think what was really interesting, what you just said, was the fact that they have to do that with authenticity, because I think there's often a question of potential greenwash risk that came up a lot in the conversations that I've had with hoteliers. And I think the ones that are really serious about sustainability are also then serious about going to the next stage of communicating that. And I think we're at a really exciting inflection point in terms of that journey. I'm just going to finish off the panel with Matthias before we run to Q&A. I think do please submit questions via the chat function, everyone, because we'll be taking those in a couple of minutes. So Matthias, I just wanted to end on collaboration, because my research had shown that collaboration was actually a really critical part of scaling up circular economy and sustainability more broadly, whether that's collaboration with the supply chain, collaboration with other hoteliers in terms of economies of scale around some of this procurement for sustainability, but also collaboration in terms of knowledge sharing. So could you explain a bit more about some of that collaboration that you've set up with other hoteliers in Kaprun? Because I know you've got a Best of Kaprun, I believe it's called, group, which sounds really interesting. And actually, I found in my research that it was kind of a generational thing. The younger generation said that they did collaborate with other hoteliers and were very open to that. So I wondered, is that your experience, and what are the advantages of collaboration in the space that you're operating in?
Yeah, so to have a little bit of background information for all of you, also here in mountain leisure travel, a lot of big companies, hotel groups are moving in with huge budgets. They are slamming prices. They don't really care about where they buy their food, etc. They just care about making it cheap and have tons of guests here. For family-owned hotels in leisure travel, this is sometimes really hard because you have a 4-star hotel just around the corner, which has half the price of yours. Therefore, we, together, all of the family hotels need to help together. We established a group. We are 11 hotels here in Kaprun in the 4-star category, which are family-owned. And therefore, all together, we have enough beds to be heard. So it's also about something about price dumping, but to have lower prices or better prices also gives you more possibility to care more about sustainability and all of that. Also for us, we together as a group, we have the possibility to buy together from local suppliers. Some suppliers can't even, if they don't know that they can produce enough, they cannot even take care of that and continue their business. So they need to have a fixed supply chain already behind of them. That's what we can offer as a hotel group together as well. Also for us, it's a knowledge pool. So we are not, right now we're just video chatting as well, but normally we're meeting and sitting down once a month. Also to discuss about problems we're figuring out in town, we're figuring out with transportation and stuff. So pretty much everything which comes up to your mind is being discussed there. And if there's something where all agree and we say we need to go forward with this, we take this topic to the tourism board or to the town itself or to the mountain company. And because we are all together about more than 1,000 beds, we have the power here to get here. Also, what we do is we are making marketing campaigns together. Also, again, probably a normal hotel, you can't afford like huge marketing campaigns, but if you do it together, you have enough budget to also work together with some bigger companies and to make like also radio or TV advertisement, which normally you couldn't probably afford with a single hotel.
I think this is fantastic. It's exactly the kind of solidarity that we require at this point in time, but also the kind of open-mindedness and refreshing teamwork that's actually needed to move forward on sustainability in this industry. I think the one thing that I've noticed parallels with finance, work for a large French bank, and actually I think the one thing that really was a game changer was when you had collaboration with competitors that were historically never talking together about these topics, because actually they're all facing the same challenges. And I think in everything that you've said, there's clearly lots of advantages in that knowledge sharing, but also in the pooling of some of those resources as well, which is really fantastic. I think we've got about 10 minutes left before we move to the breakout room. So I'm actually going to go into the Q&A. I think we were going to kind of try and have a final thought from everyone just for the last minute. I wondered, we've got a couple of questions coming on the chat though, so I might address those first and then have a couple of final words from our panelists. So We've got a question come in for Joe or Regina on, do you think the current legislation is doing enough, or is it actually hindering circular economy? I guess, Regina, you might want to tackle this first, I guess, from your perspective in Austria, and then Joe, feel free to elaborate on that in your context too.
Well, thank you. I think we are already trying to do a lot, but the problem is always with with legislation. It always takes such a lot of time, and it always takes too much time for me. So where we are acting with real sustainable companies that we are working together already right now, I think we are so far away from this really basic level. I think we can achieve from the present perspective, maybe more by supporting those initiatives, by really helping those hotels like Matthias Hotel, who are really doing a lot for sustainability, and not to just start talking about limits, because I think that's just focusing on avoiding hazards. That's what legislation is mainly for. And the other thing should be more support and to bring us really further.
Like a supportive green factor, I guess. I think there's certain there's certain industries where I think that's quite critical in the interplay between hotels and infrastructure. So a lot of this came up in the discussion that we had, and please do check it out on the 9th of October for SATI, which was about why policy is quite important for decarbonisation. And I think that's almost the kind of upstream stage of the supply chain of the hotel. And so I think in that sense, it could be a supporting factor there. But I think it requires this knowledge sharing for hoteliers to understand that potential decarbonisation pathway that they could try to achieve through some supportive policies locally, I guess. I wonder, Joe, if you see a similar context in terms of regulation being either a push or a pull factor, or maybe not a factor at all in the place that you operate in.
I think from a perspective, obviously the EU directive is pushing people to reduce single-use plastics, but it's not necessarily pushing people towards a more circular economy approach, because of it's always promoted that alternatives, can still be single-use of another material. So it's still promoting a linear economy. It's not really looking at waste reduction. Kind of like, if you could think about it as waste replacement, it's almost we're switching out single-use plastic for single-use something else, and something else isn't always the best option. And sometimes the alternatives can be worse if, as we were saying, the policy, the infrastructure hasn't caught up with the with business and with entrepreneurs that are creating new types of products. And I think we need to be very careful with that, and we don't want to solve one problem only to find that later down the line we've caused another. And I think it's really about helping people make informed decisions about what works well for them in their based on infrastructures, based on availability, but really again putting those processes before products, looking at services or products. And I think that's what will take us into the circular economy, not so much if it's literally going to be switch something out for something else. I think that still leaves us on that linear waste producing path, and that's not particularly helpful, I don't think.
And there's so much to do in that space in terms of the potential of circular economy. I know that there was a great report by one of the speakers who's going to be speaking in 2 weeks, actually on the 4th of December, called Harold Friedel from Circular Economy, and he's moved on now to other things, but he did the world's first report on the circular economy gap, and it showed that it was actually just around kind of 9%, and the world was actually less circular last year than it was the year before. So we're actually going in depressingly in the wrong direction on some elements of circularity, because there's potentially, like you said, that life cycle analysis has to be done. And I think it's very important in understanding the systemic nature of some of these issues. I think there's quite a lot of work going on in that space. It's quite niche, I would say, at the moment in the hotel space in terms of research on this, on circular economy. I think the report that Fabrice and his colleagues have done is at the forefront of that kind of systemic understanding. But yeah, I think there's so much kind of cross-sector and cross-regional knowledge sharing on this. I mean, you mentioned, Joe, a lot of examples which are really interesting, and I'd encourage all of you to please connect with our speakers on LinkedIn. I've been putting QR codes throughout the event on that, and also with the website for the Eco Label, because I think it's very important for us to share those kind of examples. I think the one you mentioned about the tins in a hotel is fascinating, and it's things that seem very simple but very effective at the same time. We're going to actually move across now to introduce Simona and Kelly, because they will be facilitators along with myself for the breakout sessions. Dan, I wonder if you could just kind of set up the breakout sessions, if that's okay, just while we do the intro as well. Dan, is that okay? I think.
Yeah, that's no problem at all. Sorry.
Okay. No problem at all. So I'm going to introduce Simona and Kelly, and I'll get them to talk a little bit about the areas of interest to them. So Simona, I know that you're based in Milan now, used to be in London, but I wondered what your perspective is on some of the discussion that we've had today and the context that we operate in. So I know you've got some fantastic examples of where you think this space is going, and I know you're a mountain woman at heart, just like myself.
Yeah, I grew up skiing, basically. I have a dad that wanted me to become a ski instructor, so that says a lot about my path. So I grew up basically in nature, and I grew up skiing in the Alps. And I think that there is so much to do. And I mean, even myself as an adult now, I see things differently. Part of it is because of the knowledge I have about sustainability. Part of it is because, for example, I see the glacier, the Adamello, that is one famous one in the Alps. It shrinks so much during my lifetime that is really kind of depressing and sobering to see that is disappearing under my eyes. So we definitely need to address those issues. And the people that love Alps, so they are super interested in those topics. So there is a lot of potential for communication and for engagement that I see is kind of untapped at the moment, at least in Italy, definitely so.
That's great. And I think you had a really cool example of a resort in an area that you go to that was trying to pioneer that as hoteliers as well, which is great in terms of the kind of nature-based experience. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. We were looking, I mean, the Dolomites are the kind of the main destination if you look for excellent landscape and ski resort that are really developed. And then we started going to these kind of remote valley in Piemonte. That is not well known because basically only off-piste skiers go there. So the guy that decided to set up this hotel basically gave us a positioning as a children family hotel. And he knows that people that go there, they don't go there mainly for skiing. So he's doing things like a tour of the hotel showing how it has been built according to sustainable principles. So it shows a part of the wall showing all the different materials and explaining why those are particularly good for sustainability. It has solar panel, is recycling water, is giving waste food to feed pigs in the local valley, is making tours to support the local communities and taking children to farms to understand how cheese is done. So those are things that is coming up with those kind of things because skiing is not the main revenue stream. But
yeah, it's interesting.
What I found fascinating is that he has created an ecosystem that is putting people in contact with nature at a very, very practical level and also engaging them and making them understand nature, how the economy of the valley works. It's simply, I found it really fascinating. And to me, kind of, I learn from him every time I go there.
That's amazing. I think we've got a request to find out which hotel that is in Piemonte. So if you could put it in the chat, that'd be great. And I guess I'm going to introduce Kelly now as well. So Kelly is also an avid outdoor enthusiast, but also an expert on climate strategies and on understanding also the nature context. I know you've done a lot of work, Kelly, recently on biodiversity, and I think that's often a topic that's not so regularly discussed, I guess, in this context. But I wondered what some of your thoughts are on what the panel have said, and yeah, if you could just introduce yourself so people know before the breakout session as well, that would be great.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Sarah. Sure. Definitely, Simona, I want to know what that hotel is myself too. So there's my me too in there. I guess maybe I'm a Canadian from way back when. I've been in London now, a Canadian mountain girl, I would say as well too, from way back when. And in London now, my main interest is how do I come from a cityscape and living now where I go, to escape. I miss the mountains now, being stuck in lockdown. And I think we all are missing special places in our hearts where we go and travel and want to reconnect with nature, even though we do our best to reconnect in maybe some of the cityscapes that we're in now. But if we're tourists, how do we help bring about and facilitate and encourage and get involved with some of the sustainability tourism conversations that are happening? How do we, and that's kind of my main impetus of getting involved and supporting you as well too, is that being from a traveling perspective and wanting to continue to travel, but want to travel with a lesser footprint than I ever have in the past. How do I continue to take that on and encourage those places that I visit as well to embrace that kind of mentality? So that's kind of it. Oh, I guess from an insurance background, I don't know if anybody cares about insurance really, but
I think the finance part was really interesting. I remember you joined the discussion a couple of weeks ago. We were looking at sustainable finance as well, but I think there's often a confluence of so many interests in sustainability, and I think that's why it's great to bring all of you together today, because I think we come from such a diversity of backgrounds and sectors and industries, which is great. So I think I don't know, Dan, if we're ready for the breakouts, but the breakouts we're basically going to go through in a bit more detail, but for about 20 minutes or so, after which we'll return to this main room to debrief and to just reflect on our breakout rooms. But essentially we're going to address three things. So one is what we think is required in the post-COVID-19 context in terms of to connect nature to Alpine tourism. It alludes a little bit to what Kelly just mentioned, actually, in terms of the agency of the tourist as well. Another one about intergenerational factors, because I think I'm slightly testing my own research there as well. And finally, understanding which elements of circularity are easily implementable and which ones we think are harder. So I think, some of our expert speakers will also be in that room as well. So we want it to be a very open discussion and encourage you all to share your experience in that. So I believe we're going to do a bit of reflection time now with Simona and Kelly, because I wanted to kind of end with a note of reflection on the breakout sessions, because I think you had quite diverse discussions. I guess, Kelly, do you want to kick off on some of your takeaways from the session that we just had earlier as well?
Mute, there we go. I'm always, I guess, maybe the consummate thinker versus the consummate student. So I didn't write the questions down. So we had a really good conversation in the first place, is how to kind of get, in a post-COVID world, how to get more sustainability into Alpine tourism. And I think that there was, the key conversation is that there's understanding the value of the asset versus forcing the space as a commodity, and how to maybe make sure that people respect the asset, value the asset, put investment back into it as an asset, instead of just, each year you just chew it up and eat it up as a commodity. And I think that that's really key. We also had some chats about how to maybe group around the it being an idea for the entire community. The destination needs to kind of set what the sustainability value or identity is of that community, and the kind of all the different not resources, but hotels and tourism gather around that and then voice that together. And I think that was really interesting too.
And I think that solidarity point is really critical because it requires understanding value across different organizations. And I know the destination also has a really big role to play in that. For those of you that are interested, I think the first SATI session that we had at the middle of September talked about that destination role. So definitely encourage you to check that out as well. Simona, I guess from your group, what did you think were some of the key takeaways and discussion topics?
One of the comments that was very interesting is that Regina made, and that we built on it, is to change the perception of the destination. So the focus has been a lot on ski and luxury destination and less on connecting to the local communities and nature. So definitely post-COVID, that is something that can be brought back and add value to the offer. And also because we know that people have a different perspective of and a need. They have rediscovered their need to connect with nature that in a way was given for granted and was not appreciated enough. And the other thing is, for example, in terms of transport, to reconsider completely transport in the region. Matthias was making a point that is perfectly valid and is happening in Milan too, that people are using cars much more than they used to, and they are not using public transport. And there, I personally feel, for example, that there is a big role that legislation or incentive have to play, because of course infrastructure has to be built to make that kind of shift that is very much needed, because smelling gas and gasoline when you are in the Alps is the most awful experience that you can have. So those were two. And then Maria made a point on an initiative that she's leading in terms of making sure that waste is disposed of in the right way, instead of being sent to a mainstream waste management and you don't know what is happening. So there is in the chat the link to her Instagram account to follow this initiative.
Amazing. And I think Maria will hopefully be talking at one of the SATIs coming up towards the end of the year. I need to follow up with you, Maria, on that. But yeah, there'll definitely be a discussion on that broader theme. I think what's interesting in what you both just said is some of those levers. So localization stands out as a really strong one there. The localization of valuing nature in particular, which is something that is not often talked about. And one of the things that sprang to mind this week, and I'd love if anyone's got some thoughts on this or research on this or any ideas, please do reach out to me, because I'm quite interested in understanding where natural capital is going on this discussion of nature-based tourism and sustainable tourism more broadly. Because I think one of the questions someone posed to me recently was, but surely there's an exploitative nature to some of these industries, and how do we actually value nature better in that process? And I personally, being an economist by training, I think I kind of default to understanding value, and I think natural capital as one of the tools to do that is really important. And so if anyone's got thoughts on that, I'd love to connect and hear them. The other question, I've got something interesting coming in from Dominic from Protect Our Winters, who posed a very interesting question, and I think we're slightly overrunning, so it's going to have to be a quick 1 minute, but I might just reflect on this around what will happen to ski resorts if they can only operate in limited capacity. It's a very good point, but also, could there be potential to have a ski pass for every other day and explore nature the rest of the time? I think this sort of came up, I guess, in what Fabrice said earlier about subscription models, because I think there is a really strong case for different types of business models in terms of the service that's offered. I think one thing that's quite interesting is understanding the role of technology within that. We didn't touch upon it so much throughout the main session, but I think technology is going to be a real lever in this space, because it's actually going to be able to create digital platforms to be able to facilitate those types of experiences, whether it's a kind of QR code type system for understanding information when you're in a retailer on sustainability, or similarly when you're in a hotel, or vice versa, having a day ski pass just kind of on your phone. And so, yeah, I think that's a really good point that you raised on. yeah, let's think about that a bit more, actually, because I think a lot of people in this particular discussion definitely have ideas on that. Might set up a spin-off session on that at some point in the coming weeks, because I think that's another thing from SATI, is that we're really trying to follow up on a lot of these dialogues that we're having. I think you've all got such an amazing kind of diversity of experience and knowledge, and I think the ideas that are coming out of this are really important for me to try and take forward with all of you, and to bring different teams together to do that, because I think they're fantastic, and I can't thank you all enough for coming together today and sharing your energy, insights and knowledge, because I really think we've got such an amazing community of people that are engaged on this topic. And I think it's so key that we have this kind of inter-sector discussion, and quite critical discussion too, right? Because I think it's important to address where the gaps are and try and ideate some of that. And I think, Dominic, in what you just raised is a perfect example of where we do need these kinds of new business models. Just to flag, so we've got, I think we've run out of time now, unfortunately, and I wanted to thank our panelists and facilitators for their time today, and for all of the amazing insights that you've shared with us all, and to the participants as well for the ideas that you've brought and some of those perspectives, because I think that's great. Just a heads up that the next SATI session will be on the 4th of December. We're actually going to be looking at the Alpine sports industry and how it can embrace, in particular, circular economy, but broader sustainability. So we've got the UK's biggest outdoor retailer on that panel, who's going to be talking about supply chains as a lever, and he's also one of the trustees of Protect Our Winters, and he's going to be talking a bit about corporates and the POW pledge. You've also got Hanno Schwab, who's developed an incredible ski, which is a freestyle ski, but he's also done loads of work on circularity in the supply chain. Eva Carlson, who's the CEO of Houdini Sportswear. And finally, it said TBC, but I've got him confirmed now. It's actually Harold Friedel, who's going to be talking about circular economy. So yeah,